Welcome to Three, a show about Federer, Nadal, and Djokovic, and part of the Tennis Channel podcast network. I'm Gill with Joel Drucker and Amy Lundy. It is kind of a lull in the calendar for the big three. There is no denying that. Rafael Nadal and the Australian Open title, number 21, is now 2 weeks removed. And we're going to discuss that as well as Juan Martin del Potro, because that's the big headline from this week is the retirement of the great Argentine, the Tower of Tandil. And he was one of the main big three foils throughout the 2010s and the late 2000s, of course, when he won his major. So we'll get into Del Potro, a little bit of a Novak update as well. But let's start with Nadal. I mean, how has this aged for you guys? Because we recorded, what was it? An hour and a half after the final ended. Is there any kind of zoomed out revelations now that we're further removed from this, Amy?
For me, the big revelation is that it wasn't really as shocking as some of the pundits have made it out to be, because I think it's one of those things that if you're really, really close to tennis and you're tracking it closely, you would have picked Medvedev, who was the odds-on favorite to win the tournament. But we do a show about the three and their greatness. So we take more of a zoomed out look at it. And for me, and I think for both of you, there was never really any doubt that Nadal could contend for this title. So the shock is not there for me. And I think it's just a function of, in any world that you're in or any realm that you're in, if you get too close to something, you can start missing the forest for the trees. And it just, the title is one of his greatest for sure. But for me, it was not a shock.
Not a shock, but I would say a surprise. I thought, particularly when Nadal tested positive for COVID and hadn't been able to train as much, and this tournament has been a little frustrating for him. I thought he could contend, be in somewhere in the second week. To win it was pretty surprising. I mean, but again, I remember going through this 5 years ago when Federer showed up in Australia at the age of 35 after missing most of the last half of the prior year, and a surprise. But of course, as you said, Amy, the whole time, never bet against Nadal. But I don't know
I don't love that adage, right? Because Nadal has won a miraculous 33% of all majors he's competed in, which is an insane number. But that means that's a 33%. That is less than half. And because nobody wins the majority of the majors they play. So I just want to throw that out there. But I think you make a good point, because and I go both ways on this. On one hand, the things Carlos Moya was saying about Nadal's preparation and what the couple months after the foot injury were like, I mean, that was serious stuff. He was saying this was a really, really difficult training block, and there were many practice sessions where it wasn't getting better and Rafa couldn't move and the training wasn't good. And then you had the COVID, and then you had the terrible draw, and the draw didn't end up being as bad as it looked. And then it's the Australian Open. It was in a tournament that Nadal had not won in over a decade. With that being said, Amy, he was the third favorite. And I almost feel like we all could agree that he was deservedly the third favorite. And let's face it, the third favorite after Medvedev and Zverev in the odds, the third favorite can always win.
Sure, those are really good odds. If there is a surprise in all this, it's probably the way he won. And again, I say this every time, it's like this age thing is like a cloud hanging over the entire sport, and it creates a bias. But tennis is so much more than just physicality or injuries. It's about experience, and it's about tactical knowledge, and it's about knowing how to expend and conserve your energy when it's needed. And all those things come with having played many, many matches in pressure situations over time. And I think credit has not been given, or was not given, to Nadal going into this tournament. But you're right, he did have COVID. Then again, he was vaccinated, and we know from science that people who are vaccinated are able to handle COVID better. So he did get over it really quickly. And Gill, I mean, I don't want to switch directions too fast on you, but I think the fact that he had so much time off and had played so little in 2021 going into this Australian Open, it's making me wonder about him playing the hard court, the North American hard court, Indian Wells in Miami, leading into the clay season. I'm wondering if that's something that he's reconsidering.
Well, we talked about that previously, and I think what he does, I think he's going to play Indian Wells for sure, for several reasons, including his friendship with Larry Ellison and his enjoyment of the tournament, and maybe even suit up a little dubs with his buddy Mark Lopez, or maybe not. And then
his coach, by the way, as well, Joel.
Then take a pragmatic look at Miami. And that's it. I mean, that's what North American hardcourt is, 2 events. And then he might end up saying about Miami, well, you know, maybe not. And then he can kind of gear up for his part of the year. But I want to point out something when you talk about when you said, Amy, about the credit given to Nadal. I give plenty of credit to him. I never counted him out. And I always thought of him, you always think of these people as contenders until proven otherwise. And I think he also illuminated some of the educational shortcomings of the other hopefuls of Medvedev. I mean, I'm curious to see how much, now that the emotion of the loss is hopefully peeled away, if Medvedev is getting back to work and thinking, what really happens? You know, in American football, they break down the film, they look at what happened, and he's treating it like business. And that's what Nadal has always done. That's what each of the big 3 have done. It's like they get back to the real work.
It's amazing the margins in our sport. And I mean, Joel, you have me thinking of Shapovalov, not only Medvedev, and the chances that he had in that match. And, you know, I thought he played very poorly in that match by his standards. Felix too. Now, Felix, I thought, played well, but he blew a 2-sets-to-love lead against Medvedev. Canadian men's tennis could have changed the course of history with a couple of things going a different way. How do we reconcile that? I mean, it's a part of me wants to ignore it. You know, what happened. Who cares? Another part of me wants to kind of think about it and consider it.
Well, you want to talk about Felix and his lead, and Dennis and his deal in their games, or you want to talk about Medvedev, you know, the 2-set-to-leave guys, 2-set-to-love guys who lost their matches? I mean, it's for them to think about what skills really go on, the match, and then the skills, and then you build the game, and then that's what these training blocks are about. Maybe skill building, and maybe certain things. For example, Medvedev should play some doubles once in a while, get some volley practice, because he needs to learn that part of the court. And Nadal, to a great degree, exposed Medvedev's limits in that part of the court.
I just think that the margins in our sport are so thin. The best players in the world win just over 50% of all their points played. And Felix had a match point against Medvedev. I mean, if he converts that match point, then, you know, it's a completely different story. Who knows what happens? And I think that these up and comers, or not the up and comers, not the next gen guys like Alcaraz, but the guys who are well established like Shapovalov and Felix and, you know, Zverev, they need to work on some of the other skills like managing their emotions and learning the routines that you go through in pressure situations, so that if you have match points, you have a better shot at converting the match point. And if you lose that match point and you let a conversion go by, how do you deal with that emotionally?
Well, I agree with that. And I think experience and decision making and toughness, all of those intangibles were so helpful for Nadal all along his run. And even in the final against Medvedev, we talked about how Rafa is emotionally and mentally better than Medvedev, in a tennis match at
Not
this
even a
time.
contest. It was, I mean, you've got a guy who's won a Nobel Prize versus a guy who's just, okay, maybe now he's an upper division and he's won one slam, but I talked about this before. You think of each slam as an exponential factor. So 1 is 1 and 2 is 4 and 3 is 9. Oh, 20 is 400. I mean, so Nadal went, and we talked about this prior in the tangible realm. Yeah, Medvedev on sort of the X's and O's seemed to have some advantages with his backhand and his serve and his movement, and then the intangible, it wasn't necessarily Nadal's advantage as much the realm of mystery. Where's that really going to go? And look, and even then, and even for all of that, for all the genius of Nadal, for all the greatness, he still won it 7-5 in the 5th set. So I think if you're Medvedev, you got to come away, hey, this is pretty good. I played the Nobel laureate, and then he's got to think about, okay, now how do I? It's not so much getting over it, because you don't think of it that way as much. How do I improve so that when he's serving at 2-3 love 40 in the 3rd set, I accelerate and I take care of those things. And that's the other thing that I think the big three have done so well in their wins. They really against other players have done really good at taking advantage of those things and marching through to the win quickly.
It's interesting how many players who have been asked over the years about what makes the big three different just say mental. I mean, I feel like a lot of players on tour feel like they can hit forehands and backhands with Nadal, Federer, and Djokovic.
But see, okay, I'm going to take issue with that.
No, okay. Well, and by the way, and I'm not saying that. I'm posing that as a question, Joel. I mean, players have been asked over the years about what separates these guys. What do you think the most common answer is?
Well, of course, mental. Everything in life is mental. Technique is mental because it starts in your brain. Because the brain, all action begins in thought. So I'm going to say, hey, guess what, Medvedev? You might want to think it's mental. This guy did some things smarter you, not just with his head, but with his technique. It reminds me of when Nadal was beating Federer frequently, and someone said, "Oh yeah, he gets in Federer's head." Well, first he gets in his backhand. So it comes down to, it's not just. I
agree. Yeah. So you agree that they usually say mental when they're asked this, but you don't believe them / you don't really think they're right.
I asked a great player once who won Wimbledon a few times, what was the difference between you? Oh, I guess I wanted it more. I said, it's just words. That's the thing, is the problem, and this is our limitation too. I know this is mine. Words can only carry meaning so far to explain something. So they use these words, this language, they're mental, they come up with the big points. I don't know. I will come. I don't want to keep going. I want to hear some of Amy's thoughts on this.
Well, I was asked on another podcast just a very simple question: why did Nadal win? And for me, it comes down to the fact that he's an all-court player and Medvedev is not. And that is mental, if you think about it, because Rafa, at some point in his development or his personality or whatever, mentally decided that he was going to learn all courts of the game. He was going to learn volleys. Well, that's mental. Your brain has accepted learning new knowledge, and your brain has not shut yourself off to certain topics or areas of the sport. So again, I agree with what both of you guys are saying, which every little thing is mental. But the real reason for me that Nadal won the match was the fact that he could handle all areas of the court.
Here's something I think I've said this before. If I'm talking to great players over 75 years of tennis history, and you find out what makes the super geniuses somewhat better. And I think what the game is, a lot of it is matches are played in patterns, right? We see these patterns, these point patterns, cross court drives and body serves and all this stuff. And what the great players do at certain stages of the match, it could be early, middle, it could be any stage, they do something that busts the pattern. And what that does that doesn't just win them 1 point, that wins them 20 points. Because now the underdog has gone from thinking, hey, wait, I thought we were just playing this and it's executional. And the greater player who has the broader line of attack does something kind of like, whoa. And that rocks the underdog on his heels, not just for the 1%. Well, what's he going to do next? And now the whole thing is broken open. And in a one-on-one sport, that's very powerful. It's not like a team sport where you can bring someone off the bench to then counter that with something else. You've just got to kind of face it. It's like, oh my God, he did something I didn't even know about that. And that gets you, I've talked to lower ranked players about that. That gets you out of balance. But then it comes back to way back to the thing you said, Amy, which is great about mental. Rafa knew from a very young age, I mean, these better volleys and things, this isn't 2 years. I mean, how he uses them is a little more recent, but he was becoming a great volleyer in 07, 08, when he won Wimbledon the first time in 08, all of that. So again, it's the mental choice of how you build your skills and what you work on. And so again, to get back to Medvedev, what do we do with these volleys? How do we work on these volleys? What situations do we practice in our training blocks? Do we play practice sets where we serve and volley? Do whatever that may be, not to become Patrick Rafter, but just to broaden the arsenal.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, it's true, because everything you do on the training court and all of your development, yeah, it's mental. I think the other element, and I agree that if you ask me, why did Nadal win the match, I also go to a lot of technical things like Medvedev's ability to finish off of mid-court balls against Nadal's counter punching. But I also thought Nadal dug a little bit deeper and was willing to suffer a little bit more through some crucial stages, Joel. I think effort. Well, Joel, I think effort is not always a factor in a match, but in this match, I did think it was a factor. And it's not about how badly Medvedev wanted it, right? Because he wanted it just as bad, but how far can you push your body physically?
Well, but what do you have to push it with? It's like the Medvedev inability to finish off those things.
Well, I'll answer that. Medvedev trying to finish points, shorten points in the third and the fourth set, all the backhand drop shots he hit, which, Joel, I know you and I agree, we were like, this is ridiculous how many backhand drop shots you're hitting, and he wasn't winning any of the points. That is looking for a way out instead of accepting some of that physical pain. Nadal accepts the physical pain.
The physical and the emotional, the whole deal. That's
yes,
right. Agreed.
Yes.
Agreed.
So I just want to add that aspect. Okay, that was great. Great little post 2 weeks after the fact.
I just like the eternal case for suffering, because we like to suffer. It's okay.
Yeah. Well, we to be continued. All right. Juan Martin del Potro. I mean, where to begin? I have some. Yeah. I mean, he suffered in a way that was, you wouldn't wish that on anyone, because there's nothing worse than being injured. We can get into that. I have some really important memories in my tennis fandom that are attached to Del Potro, that I guess I'll begin with. 2009 US Open final was the first tennis match I ever saw in person, and in my life. I was in the upper deck. I didn't know that much about tennis at the time, but I saw Del Potro, and that's not, I mean, I love tennis, but I was more of a player. I wasn't as much of a watcher. I remember Del Potro cried after the third set after he lost, and I just saw how much it meant to him and the emotion. I thought he was broken. He wins the fourth, he wins the fifth, and after the fifth set, he's crying again. Now it's out of joy. The emotional roller coaster of that match was really stuck with me. And that's the kind of one-on-one war and chess match that tennis can be. I mean, that match, I don't think anything will ever beat it for me. So I have Del Potro to thank for introducing me to live tennis in a way that could not have been any more impactful. and that'll stay with me.
The first match you ever saw in person was a 5-set US Open final?
Yeah, and if I
Wow.
yeah.
Wow, that of seeing Federer's Federer's quest for a 6-peat.
Yes.
And wow, that is impressive. Wow. I was at that match working for Tennis Channel, and yeah, it was quite. It seemed early on that was going to be kind of like another W for Roger versus this first time finalist who was a good player and had beaten Nadal handily in the semis. But this Roger Federer going for a 6th straight US Open. Federer had already won the French in Wimbledon that year, beaten Del Potro in the semis of Roland Garros. So, but yeah, he a very impressive player, Del Potro. I mean, that forehand is a massive, physical, hard shot, big.
And as it relates to R3, I think it's interesting that he had to beat both Nadal and Federer in that tournament to get his title. And he beat Djokovic in the Olympics on his way to a silver medal. And so if you go on YouTube and you look Del Potro versus the Big Three for a video search, you can find some of the most amazing points. And I encourage anyone to do that. And the way that he was injured, a lot of times it came down to this knee, which he shattered twice going for balls, the kneecap.
Yeah.
So it's really unlucky. And if he were still around, he could probably contend. And for me, it's just a shame the way that it has ended. And I hope that he's able to live without pain. He tells this story of how he's just trying to drive home in Argentina to Tandil, and it's like a 3-hour drive from where he's living, and or 3 to 5 hour drive, and he has to stop and stretch his knee periodically. And for him, that was kind of the final straw where he knew it was time.
That's really sad. A very beloved, likable, like kind of a gentle giant. His tennis though versus R3, he had 17 wins against those guys. He beat Federer 7 times, Novak 4, Rafa 6. Beat Roger in the US Open twice, and Nadal. Also, I think I give him. Anyone who played a match with Del Potro knew they had been in a battle, a physicality a little different than Nadal with a topspin, but very much that you'd been through it. I think back to the 2013 Wimbledon semi, epic loss to Djokovic. That I suspect Andy Murray, who played Jokers in the finals. Thank you, Juan Martin.
Yeah.
Thanks for that, because you could see Novak. He took a lot because when Del Potro was in form and playing well, it wasn't just hit the ball big, but he could play long rallies and depth and a lot of weight on the ball. So really sad, because he is definitely, it'll be interesting to see. We'll have to sort through just to think, okay, who was after the 3 and maybe Murray and Wawrinka, who else would have been more in the mix? And he was right in there.
Yeah. Now, one of my favorite stats that surfaced about the 2009 final, that was in the middle of a stretch where the Big Three won 29 out of 30 majors. That was the meat of the dominance.
Mm-hmm.
And Del Potro was the one in there, which was, and again, he beat Nadal and Federer. It wasn't like there was that one fluky draw and he didn't have to. From a win percentage standpoint, he was in the period, I think from 2009 to now, he was 5th behind Federer, Nadal, Djokovic. Murray was 4th, and then Del Potro. But you have to think, with all of the times where he was coming back from injury and not at his best, he would have probably been closer to like where Andy Murray was at. And like, I truly think that he could have had if he were healthy, could have had a very similar career to Andy Murray, and it would have been a similar foil to the Big Three that Andy Murray was.
It's a similar foil as far as level of play, and yet a different foil in terms of style of play, because again, the physicality of Del Potro. And that's a great point about remember when he's coming back at one point from an injury and he had to hit a one-handed slice backhand for a while.
He got to 3 in the world. That was eye-opening to me. he got to 3 in the world mostly with just a slice, and he could kind of hit a backhand drive, but it was flat and didn't really do much. It was really just trade the backhand, destroy the forehand.
He made it all the way to the final of the US Open in 2018, where he lost to Djokovic. I mean, the guy had talent. The guy had the body to excel in this sport, and he had the heart. It was just really unlucky what happened to him. And that, to me, says that looking at the careers of the big three, not only have they been great and wonderful and had the spirit and the drive and the game, but they've also had a little bit of luck to be able to stay healthy and sustain what they've had.
Well, Roger and Novak probably most so. Rafa, one of the reasons why he's won a higher percentage of slams is he hasn't played as many. He has.
Yeah.
I mean, not that he's minimized, but he's had his share of years where he's been able to play a major, or he's withdrawn from a major, etc. So it's different. The Novak and Roger. I mean, well, and it's funny. I like the thing you said earlier, Amy, about the mental. This gets to the whole decisions made when one's young, about training patterns, about stretching, about all these kind of choices that are made. And even then, you don't know what's going to happen. You don't know what's going to happen. But the role of technique and training and discipline, and we haven't even addressed, let's say, how these guys deal with their equipment and their rackets and their string tensions and their grips and all the things that contribute in their shoes and that contribute to them staying like the thoroughbreds that they are.
Yeah, don't leave out genetics though.
Right. No, that's true. Well,
yeah, I like to bring it up because, we got to be in reality with the effect that has in terms of what the cards are dealt from a health perspective. Like Del Potro and his wrists, it might have been, it was both wrists. It was his left and his right. It's crazy.
Yeah.
He had double wrist surgery.
Yeah, amazingly though, he came back from the wrist stuff. It was the knee stuff, and the both of them involved, I believe, slips, and the second one was a slip on the grass in the right near the net. I mean,
yes, the knee things were incidents, but the wrists were not.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting too that he's a taller player with these huge like quads on his legs, and the guys in the sweet spot are tall, but they're not that tall. So our big three are all 6'1". So tall people can have, knee problems or joint problems or things like that. So that's an interesting, and that, I know that the sport of men's tennis is getting taller. So that's an interesting thing to keep in mind.
So what's the 23andMe test for the young tennis player that determines their things? See, the way I look at genetics, the nature part of it is we don't know what percentage that is. So we don't know that. Maybe we could, but the other stuff we can just be massively obsessive about, which the big three have shown us they have, and they have the willingness and the resources, and there's lots more sports science than there was even 20 years ago. But the nature part, it would be interesting. What if you were a 12-year-old tennis player and there was some kind of test you could go that could determine your physiological points of vulnerability? This could say, well, you're going to be this, it looks like you might be this tall, and let's do the knees. And so maybe the technique and maybe the training, it's like this whole little, mapping things out of what it's going to be. So you can know, okay, and you ought to do this. And there are certain things, there are definitely things known about how you should train. Like some players, like the Rafa 3 hours, the 3-hour practice session is not the Roger practice session. And that's hardwiring, that's disposition. Like I know that, like, just if I may, for example, if I may say, Gill, you and I had a chance to hit recently. We had a wonderful hit. You're going to be, you'll be happy hitting 50 cross court. You can do that. Not me. I'm not good at the 50 cross court. I'm like 10 cross court, and I'm in my mind. Well, I'm not disciplined for that. And that doesn't mean that's not a yes or no. And maybe there's a thing that won't be as pleasing to you. It's so how that some of that is inexact, but the science of the body stuff, I don't know. We should explore that.
All I know is I could have trained as hard as anyone. I was not going to be, no, I'm joking, but I'm joking, but I'm not, right? Because, you see how few Diego Schwartzmans there are on tour compared to 6 feet and above, for example. But also when it comes to like someone as fast and strong as Nadal, Djokovic, and Federer, or now I think the young guy who stands out is Carlos Alcaraz. It's just the speed and power of Carlos Alcaraz. A lot of guys just are not going to have that. They weren't born with that. And I know Alcaraz trains very, 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 very hard, but that's genetics.
Agreed. But now you're talking about success stratagems and we were talking earlier about injuries.
Yeah. Right.
I'm not focusing on the thing about no matter how much and your genetics and you can't teach height and all this other stuff. I'm talking about
good point.
Sustainability. That's a different factor. Yeah.
Yes. So we would be more in the area of like Nadal's foot, right? That there's a genetic deformity in his bone, in his foot, which he has always had. So that's an example where sometimes health issues are genetic.
That's right.
Yeah. Okay. But we can't end on that with Delpo. We can't.
Well, let's talk about Roger, because I got something to say about Roger.
Okay.
The thing that I was not a huge fan of, and look, again, I call them as I see them, and everyone knows that I am a big fan of Roger Federer. I'm a big fan of all three of them. But I did not like 2 days after Nadal has his triumph at the Australian Open, Roger goes to his sponsor in Credit Suisse in some sort of a weird teleconference and starts giving all sorts of updates on his comeback. I think it would have been better to let Nadal have his week, his denouement, and his glory for a few days before we saw all these massive Federer announcements. A quibble.
I gotta say, I didn't even see that. I didn't even see what he said.
You didn't see him on the big video screen being interviewed by someone from Credit Suisse?
Oh, I saw that. I did see that. But yeah, I saw that. That is kind of interesting. The timing. It was that soon after the Aussie. Yeah.
You missed that, Gill. You missed all that?
I totally missed that. Yeah.
Okay. He gave a lot of updates on how he's doing.
Amy, he did give a very nice Instagram message.
Yes, he did. He was, appropriately classy. I didn't want to, especially since the injury update was just sort of like, yeah, I'm not quite ready yet. My doctors are holding me back. That was one of the big takeaways. He wants to do more, but his doctors are holding him back. Since he didn't really say much at all, I thought the whole thing could have waited. And also, if you're going to do an interview like that, an extended interview, look, I'm biased, but do it with a neutral media outlet. For him to do it with his sponsor and some sort of a weird teleconference, I wasn't a huge fan of it. Well, just my opinion.
This is the world of subject-driven content. It's like Instagrams and tweets and sponsor branded content that goes out. I mean, it's a whole wild west of media these days, of how that works, and here we are.
And then the other thing that came out, if you guys saw it, is that Federer and Nadal will both be playing Laver Cup in the fall, and
that one reached me. That one got to me.
It made its way through.
Did it get to you? Did you? I always.
The carrier pigeon informed me that Laver Cup will indeed occur, and Federer and Nadal will play doubles together.
Yeah, I saw that, right. And there's something about them joining forces. I never quite understand why these announcements of these team-related tournaments, like 6-7 months in advance, where they come out during other times, as if the promoters think, well, people are into tennis now, so I might as let them know that he's going to be playing this event. I mean, it's not exactly, but
ticket sales, and those Laver Cup tickets are not cheap. So they want to get it out there. Federer and Nadal will be there, so get your tickets.
Yeah, a little presumptive, but it worked because it did get a lot of attention. Let's end on a quick update on Djokovic. He's in the entry list for Indian Wells, but we all know that really doesn't mean much. And in a mandatory event like a major or a Masters, everyone goes on the entry list unless they say, don't put me on there. And it's unclear at this time what Novak's status is for Indian Wells. But speaking of promotion, they have not listed him prominently. They have not sold the tournament as world number one. Novak Djokovic will be here. It's kind of been a sub note, which has been a little bit weird and awkward, sort of a half measure.
Right. I mean, I saw a release that talks about Nadal, and Nadal coming back to the tournament, hasn't played it since 2019, won it several times. So it's a little more focused that way, kind of working on the contingency, the notion that maybe Novak won't show up. But yeah, we're going to be tracking this Novak thing all year, and it's kind of hard to be too ahead of it or too much conjecture. Just who knows? We're going to have to see all these different protocols, different countries, all this stuff.
One thing that we do know is that here in the US, COVID is starting to go back down again. So hopefully Novak can start playing again, and the world itself will open up a little more.
We hope for that. All right. Well, very enjoyable show. Covered a lot of ground there. And as we approach Indian Wells, I'm sure we'll get more into Nadal's scheduling, his decision to play, and we'll keep an eye on Novak and what he's doing. Farewell, Juan Martin del Potro. Much love. Thank you for the memories. That'll do it for this episode of 3. Remember, we're available on all podcast platforms. Big help if you leave a rating and a review on Apple and Spotify. And if you're watching on YouTube, like, comment, and subscribe. We'll see you next time on the next episode of 3.